So it's 1970, and after several years of dwindling fortunes and being consigned to the scrap heap of pop culture irrelevance, despite making some of the most forward-thinking and timeless music of the late 60s, the Beach Boys now have reason to be optimistic. Their new label, Warner Brothers, is thrilled to have them. The band members themselves are brimming over with enthusiasm and creativity. All of the Beach Boys are writing songs, great songs. They're coming in fast and with no signs of stopping. Brian Wilson, the architect of their sound, who lately has only been contributing sporadically, is fully on board to support his brothers, cousin, and friends. Sounds promising, doesn't it? The album the Beach Boys released in 1970 was called Sunflower, and in Europe, and particularly in Great Britain, it's hailed as a masterpiece, the Beach Boys' Sgt. Pepper. In America, well, it's an entirely different story. The album barely causes a ripple and then vanishes without a trace. However, in 2021, it's back, and in a big way. And here to talk about it with us is editor of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine, David Beard, who was last on this program talking about a sunflower-related project that he was putting together called California Music, and a re-recording of Add Some Music to Your Day featuring members of the Beach Boys and their family and friends. So it's fortuitous that he's back with us today. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
Now, I don't know about you, but I discovered the Sunflower album back in the 80s when I bought it on a used cassette, and ever since, it's been in my rotation of top 5 favorite Beach Boys albums ever. And it was an album that had a very low profile for a long, long time. But now the Sunflower album and the Surf's Up album, along with over 100 unreleased tracks, have been represented, I guess is the best way to put it, on this new box set called Feel Flows. And I think Sunflower is finally getting its due.
I would agree with that. And for me, the word due is that it's reaching the general masses. Mm-hmm. Because the Sunflower edition of Endless Summer Quarterly, which is, when we talked before, I was working on that in March of 2020 when the idea came to me to do the California Music Project to benefit Feeding America. So when I was doing the Sunflower edition, I was having a ball because I was getting into the minutiae, as I'm prone to do. And then the magazine, that edition, the Sunflower one, sold out 5 times. That's never happened in the history of ESQ. And that told me something. I think Sunflower has had such a solid footing in terms of it's certainly a generation of Beach Boy fans have adored it for decades.
And isn't it amazing to see all of the attention in the press that the Feel Flows box set is getting, and people who weren't even into the Beach Boys suddenly know about Sunflower and Surf's Up.
I don't know if you saw it, but there's a billboard out in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And then it's on Times Square right above the Hard Rock. It's like, are you kidding me? How great and glorious that is to see the advertisement for this thing, because all I can think is, here we go again. Here's another generation. And I think in this case, because it's 2021, and here is 2 albums plus everything they recorded in that bubble of time, which is another glorious thing, is that we're presenting the listener with an experience. Or not we're, I mean, Alan Boyd, Mark Lynette, Jerry Schilling, the Brother Record president, Howie Edelson, who wrote the notes, the team at Iconic and Universal, they've presented the experience. Yeah, it's Sunflower, but people don't know it's Sunflower. If you're just the general public and you're a Beach Boy fan, you see this new thing called Feel Flows, and you don't know anything about Sunflower, aren't you lucky? Because you get this and you put it on, and it's some of the most fascinating, satisfying music the group, and that's the pivotal thing here ever created.
And I remember Bruce Johnston in the Endless Harmony documentary saying Pet Sounds was Brian's statement and Sunflower was the band's statement. But that's not to say that Brian didn't play a major role in this record.
Yeah. The studio, for those who don't know, was in Brian's home. And this is what's interesting to me, Dave, is that the studio was in his house, and it was not Brian's studio, which is crazy.
Right.
The studio belonged to the Beach Boys. They built it in his house. He agreed to those terms. So it was their studio. It was their official studio, and it was inside his home. So they just went over whenever they were ready to record because it was their studio. They were there all the time. And Brian, his bedroom was not exactly over the studio, but his bedroom was upstairs, so he could hear what they were doing down below. So often he would be inspired to come down and work on something or work with them. And during Sunflower, he was pretty engaged. I mean, he wrote and came up with This Whole World all by himself.
Yeah.
And that's quite a powerful song.
It is. And you know what? We're going to go through every single track on this album like we usually do. We're not going to play all of them, but I will say that we are going to play This Whole World maybe a little later on in the program. But I want to get into this period that's the end of the Beach Boys' tenure at Capitol Records and the beginnings of their relationship with Warner's, which got off to kind of a rocky start.
Yeah. They had the last Capitol album, that's what they called it. That's what the tape reel box said. And they never submitted anything, but they kept most of the songs that they did, and that's on this box, this Feel Flows box set, these 69 recordings. And then they kind of kept some of them, started recording like crazy. And then they had a second album, so when they had signed with Reprise, they actually submitted a lineup, and it was declined. And originally the album was called Add Some Music. So it was declined, and they were like, oh boy. And when you listen to this box set, you're like, how is this stuff declined?
Yeah.
I mean, I listened to San Miguel, and I'm like, what?
I know. That's a great cut.
That should have been a single.
Yeah.
And then the story goes, is the way they got the Sunflower album is they went back and resurrected another Smile recording. And that's how they blew Lenny Waronker away, is he came up to the house, they turned off the lights, and they just sat there, and they played Cool, Cool Water for him. And Al Jardine told me that he kind of got teary-eyed and was like, oh, like he was that moved by it. And that's how they got Sunflower out the door. But even before Sunflower was mastered, they were already working on the next album. They were just that fluid, that creative, that experimental.
So let's go through it. Let's begin with side one, track one, Slip On Through, and the MVP of this album really has to be Dennis, who has incredible songs on here, 4 incredible songs. Slip On Through kind of has an R&B vibe, and it's really a perfect opener.
Yeah, Dennis Wilson, for me personally, he's a hard guy to explain to people. If somebody said, if they'd never heard a song by Dennis, and they asked me, how would you describe Dennis Wilson as a songwriter? That question, I think I could answer. My answer would be emotive. There is not a Dennis Wilson song that I can think of that does not have Dennis in every note. And 9 times out of 10, when we're talking about this era of songwriting for the Beach Boys, and Dennis in particular, 9 times out of 10, the songs were getting finished because of Daryl Dragon. And for those who don't know that name, Daryl went on to become captain of Captain and Tennille. Knowing the stories that I've heard from so many people about Dennis, what likely happened on these gorgeous, incredible songs, he'd probably come in, lay them down, record them, work on them, but then he'd go fishing. He was not like Brian in the way that Brian focused on completion. Dennis was not that way. Dennis was about laying it down in the moment. And then Daryl Dragon was the guy who'd kind of come in behind the scenes and say, okay, well, let's do this. And, if Dennis did take off, then Daryl would finish the song. Not meaning that Dennis was not involved. Very much involved. It is Dennis. There are people in music who record stuff that you actually feel their essence, that this is who they are. And everything Dennis Wilson ever wrote and recorded is who he was. And that's what I love about any song that we're going to talk about on Sunflower. It is Dennis Wilson. You get to hear him. And for somebody that, many people don't know because he left us too soon, this is such a great living example of Dennis's soul.
The next track on the Sunflower album is the song we mentioned earlier, This Whole World, and Brian manages to be, just under 2 minutes, cosmic and juvenile. It's like a holdover from an earlier era of the Beach Boys, but sounds positively progressive in a way that's breezy and light.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to use the word formula, it's right here. I mean, yeah, it's like the old original early 60s stuff, right? 2-minute songs.
Yep.
Brian knew how to do that very well. And you know, I love it because it's such a great song. It's a great message. That's, I think, another part of the Sunflower album that's going to keep coming up here as we go through these songs is the heart. All of this is like the Beach Boys kind of loving the world.
Track 3 on the album, a song we've mentioned several times now, Add Some Music to Your Day, Add Some Music, the original title for this album before it became Sunflower. And it's a song that was revived on the Beach Boys reunion tour of 2012. And it's written by Brian, Mike, and Joe Knott. David, who is Joe Knott?
Well, Joe was a family friend of Brian's, and he was kind of just around in the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, it's funniest thing, too, because after I did the California Music Project, you know, Omnivore put the video up on YouTube, and Joe Knott, of all people, commented. And I since got in touch with him. I couldn't believe that Joe Knott, I didn't know if he was alive or anything. So I got in touch with him, and we had a lovely conversation, and I think I used his conversation as like a letter to the editor in one of last year's magazines as a kind of like a follow-up. And he told me all about sitting with Brian at the piano and coming up with the what he remembered as writing the bridge, which is the music when you're alone is like a companion.
Right.
You know, that part. And when I talked to Mike about the song, he remembered writing having a hand in the verses. So,
you know, the verses sound like Mike. Mike sometimes writes in this kind of cinematic way where he's putting these pictures in your mind. Like every day of the summertime, you hear children chasing ice cream cars. That's totally Mike Love.
Yeah, well, this song is kind of like a Surfing USA in a way because it like Surfing USA mentions surfing locations. This song gives you everything that you might think of in ways that you might hear music.
Right.
Walking by a neighbor's home. I mean, it's true.
WFDU FM.
We're back talking with David Beard, editor of Endless Summer Quarterly magazine, and the next song on side 1 of 1970's Sunflower album, a song, well, it'll be no surprise that Dennis Wilson got to know a lot of women during his lifetime, a song called Got to Know the Woman. Some people have said this song doesn't really fit with the rest of Dennis's contributions on the album because this is kind of a cocky, hey ladies, here I am kind of a song, but that's also a big part of Dennis's spirit.
Yeah, and these songs for the most part, written with Greg Jacobson, are kind of more that charismatic style that you just mentioned, because like the first songs where Dennis became a songwriter were back on 68's Friends album, and that's Be Still and Little Bird, and those were written with Steve Kalinich. And those are kind of softer, more kind of loving looks at nature and things like that. And I think Steve should be credited big time for being able to tap into that side of Dennis, because that side of Dennis, when it showed up, was brilliant. I mean, we're going to have an example of that here in a few tracks. But Got to Know the Woman, absolutely. It's raucous. It's kind of in your face. It's kind of like funky honky-tonk blues.
Right,
For lack of way of describing it. But it's it oddly fit this album.
Yeah, everything fits on this album because you can hear the enthusiasm.
Yeah, it was a group effort. Everybody was on everybody's song. It's the opposite of the Beatles' White Album. It's all being very creative. And they had, oh, by the way, an incredible engineer in Steve Desper who understood what they were doing and was enthused by what they were doing, because he was learning and he was executing stuff in such a way with what he understood with the technology of the day and made this an incredible album.
Next up on the album is a song written by Bruce Johnston with a little help from Brian called Deirdre, and it shows that Bruce is a master craftsman because this is the sound of 70s AM pop. I mean, it is so right in the pocket, and it's the catchiest track. I mean, there's an abundance of catchy tracks on this album, but it's so darn catchy, and it's a delicious pop confection.
Delicious.
Well,
I've never heard it, but it's interesting because Bruce has a very, you use the word, what is it, master what?
Oh, master craftsman.
Okay. I think Bruce Johnston, they have this Masterclass series out there.
Yeah.
I think Bruce is incredible at Masterclass. And in terms of he could do one on producing and he could do one on songwriting. And I think it would be fascinating. Bruce comes from classical training. Bruce comes from Beverly Hills. The Beach Boys came from Hawthorne. They didn't come from any type of training. And for Bruce to kind of fit the mold well enough on this album, again, it's the warmth, it's the brotherhood, the musical brotherhood. I think that's why, in my opinion, that all the Beach Boys love this album. All of them. Because when you talk to them about it, they're thinking about the period. They're thinking about the camaraderie and the brotherhood that they had with each other, and the give and take, or just the give. There was no take. It was the give. Everybody was just happy to show up and happy to support and happy to move forward.
Well, there's no better example of moving forward in music than the song that ends side one of Sunflower, It's About Time. It has a heavy Latin-flavored Santana feel to it. Dennis primarily wrote this song. Carl sings it, and I can't help wondering if the lyric here refers to Brian. You know, I used to be a famous artist, as proud as I can be, struggling to express myself for the whole world to see. I used to blow my mind sky high, searching for the lost elation. I mean, that kind of sounds like they're singing about Brian.
I'm wagering a guess here. I think it's Dennis to Brian, but the songwriting credits on here are interesting. It's Dennis, Bob Bergman, Al Jardine, Carl Wilson. So Dennis and Carl both being songwriters on this, that kind of leans, the fan in me thinks, oh, it must be about Brian.
Right.
Or for Brian, but I don't know that that's necessarily true. It could be a self-reflective track.
Yeah.
Especially with Al, Dennis, and Carl all having a hand in writing it. It could be a self-reflective track because you got to remember, if they're writing and singing this song from this perspective of their popularity in the United States, it certainly makes sense. And that's, I've always kind of wondered about that myself. If the Beach Boys' popularity hadn't waned, it's like This Whole World should have been a single. It's About Time should have been a single. And I just want to mention, I saw the current tour on Sunday, July 18th. It was the second date into Mike and Bruce's current tour, and they played It's About Time to open the second set.
Ah.
And I have to tell you, it just knocked my socks off. And as you might imagine, John Kelso was beating the living crap out of the drums.
So let's flip the record over. Now we're on side 2 of the Beach Boys' Sunflower album. And when I bought this on cassette, the opening songs on the sides were switched. So my early version opened with Tears in the Morning. And this track, it's Bruce Johnston again. It's romantic and melodramatic, but in a good way. And it conjures up images of a Paris bistro at dusk. And it has this ghostly piano coda that reinforces the idea that the song's protagonist has been left alone. I find it a deeply, deeply moving song.
You and I are very similar in this regard. When I discovered Sunflower, it was on a cassette. And I always know I had the vinyl because I remember being over at a friend's house and having the record. So I'm a little fuzzy on that, but I absolutely and actually I have the UK pressing of it early on in my collecting. So the UK pressing also includes the song Cotton Fields on it, which is weird. But yeah, when you get to what I remember very vividly, I was over at a friend's house and I flipped the record over to side B. And this song kicked it off. Now, I'd already heard this. I'd already listened to it, the album, a couple times. But for whatever, and that's why I can remember this particular night and how it crystallized with me. And I was listening to it and thinking, this is such an incredible, extraordinary recording. It sounds like a mashup of Elton John and Bacharach. And it's a testament to Bruce Johnston's songwriting. It's an incredible song, and that whole coda that you mentioned.
Oh.
It's such a plaintive little. I'm going to put my soul here for you, but I'm not going to ever tell anybody what it's about.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell anybody what I'm feeling because it's too sacred to me. But I'm willing to put my feelings into piano notes. So you'll hear the piano notes, but I'm never going to tell anybody what this is about because it's too personal. And that is the difference between Bruce, I think, and like as an example, Dennis, as we were talking about Dennis before. Dennis, what you get in these recorded songs, that's Dennis Wilson. You know his story. Just listen. With Bruce is a little bit more emotionally close to the vest. So what you get from Bruce in a recorded in a song is you get the art form. You get the expression, but you don't necessarily get his truth because he coveted it. You know, it's too important to him.
Just an incredible piece of work. Next up, we have, it's an embarrassment of riches, this album, a song written by Brian and Mike, and this song is as good, it's the equal to anything on Pet Sounds. It's All I Want to Do.
Well, there's that, what I like to call the perfect marriage of songwriters. This, Mike Love and Brian Wilson were and remain the Lennon and McCartney of their catalog. Now, there's obviously, thanks to Tony Asher, we have great material from Pet Sounds. And thanks to Van Dyke Parks, we have wonderful, adventurous, and elaborate and fun and incredible. I could go on and on.
Yeah.
With superlative for the Smile material. But Mike and Brian, no surprise. And this is Mike singing. I've never seen photos of him from this session, but I got to imagine he's probably sitting down. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But he just sounds so relaxed. And I think that level of contentment in his delivery is what makes this song so special.
And you would think that's the highlight of the record, right? For some people it is, and for some people the next song is. This song almost has moved beyond the confines of Sunflower. It's just become that special a song. It's Dennis's Forever.
Yeah. For years now, for decades, we have, I think us older fans have kind of looked down on the fan base of younger kids of like the last 30 years who are now in their 30s or their 40s, but were turned on to the song Forever through the television show Full House. And now, the beautiful thing of that, and I've felt this all along for so many years, I love that. I don't care whether it's John Stamos or Rick Springfield. I don't care who it is that's turning people on to Beach Boys music. And the fact that it's a Dennis Wilson song that has kind of just lingered in our stratosphere for so many years that people hear it. Okay, maybe they think Full House, maybe they think Jesse and the Rippers, and John Stamos, but it's a wedding song. That's what Stamos has told me. People come up and go, "That's the song we play at our wedding." It's kind of like God Only Knows. It's taken its own rightful place in our culture, and it's a strange thing to say this even out loud. But thanks to John Stamos, so many people know this song. And I honestly think because Carl Wilson supported and was in the video on Full House of the re-recording of Forever, that tells me that I really believe this statement, that Dennis would be proud. That Dennis would be so satisfied to know that something he wrote survived in such a way that it's reached so many people. And for it to register with Carl that way when they did that episode back in, when was it, 92?
Probably, yeah.
That tells me that Dennis was very much alive inside Carl, and that his spirit was very much alive in Carl. Because if Carl didn't believe in it, it never would have happened. And that, to me, is your indicator that Carl valued the song that much, and that he wanted to see his brother, who is no longer here, he wanted to see his brother's legacy sustained. And that's huge. That's huge.
The next song on the album, boy, you could think of it as being in the shadow of God Only Knows because it shares so many similarities. Carl on lead and similar background vocals, but it is just a breathtaking piece of work.
It is. And you know what? Side two, as we go here, I'm just looking at these songs and the writing credits and everything, and I'm still, to this day, just so... I'm floored. It's such a great experience. Our Sweet Love is, and it's interesting because Carl sings it, but it's produced by Brian, Carl, Al, and Bruce. So here, again, this is this collective energy. This is this warmth, this warm collective energy. And you can hear everybody on it. It is such a great little kind of fun vocal track because Carl sings it gorgeously, as you might imagine. And then all the little backing things going on that are in and that happens through the rest of the album. It happens on the next song too, and that's why it's literally, this album is like listening to a sunflower blossom. If the 12 tracks represent anything, it is putting it on and just like watching, experiencing life. Again, I keep getting asked by everybody, "What's your favorite track off this Feel Flow?" It's not a favorite track. It's not a favorite anything. It's the experience.
The next to last song on the album harkens back to Little Bird from the Friends album of 1968, a song we referenced earlier. It's At My Window. What do you think of At My Window?
This song, what I liked about this song when I grew to know it so many years ago is I liked that Bruce's voice was on it. Because up until this point, Bruce really didn't have, it was rare that he had two songs on an album, let alone would vocally be prominent or featured where you could hear him and make him out in a lead on
right.
three. That was really rare. And I thought this song is like typical Brian humor, but not on purpose, because he's saying these, what are supposed to be French words, but they're so butchered, it's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah.
The general idea is the bird flew to my window.
Well,
but it's evocative. It's a very, like most of these songs, even if all these songs are very evocative, they transport you. And I think that's what was cool about Beatle albums, is they stopped worrying about having singles. They just made albums. And that's what this what this represents to me. And maybe that's why someone else made the comparison to Sgt. Pepper. Because that's what this is. This is an experience. This is a journey. This is you get to visit with the Beach Boys. And I don't base how good this album is on how it charted, because it did quite well overseas. I view this album as an experience, as I do kind of most of their albums, but kind of from Pet Sounds on, they kind of got more into that how does it wash over you? Not any one song, which one's your favorite. It's how does the experience, what's the experience like for you from beginning to end? What is that? And so that's kind of how I view many of the Beach Boys albums, as experiences. And if a single happened to be released off of an album, so be it. But it still was putting the album on kind of letting her wash over you, being a part of the room with it. And there's no better album that I can think of in their entire catalog than Sunflower for that purpose.
So Sunflower ends with a little water, which is needed to make sunflowers grow, and it's the song Cool Cool Water. We talked about it previously in our discussion about Smile, and we mentioned it at the top of this discussion. What can you say? I mean, it's just a great track and a nice closer. So we mentioned the album cover. We always like to talk about the album covers. We did that on a previous episode when we were talking about California music. You've got the Beach Boys with their children on the album cover. Very lovely photo. The gatefold inside is interesting too, because you've got the Beach Boys at a Hollywood studio is what it looks like. And what's the story behind this dress up here on the album?
Well, now this is what's interesting about that. Now, Mike's not in the shot. And nobody can quite remember as to why, including Mike, as to why he wasn't there.
He had the Al Jardine role that time. You know, there's always got to be one Beach Boy who, for some reason, is not there.
They were all called to come down to the lot at Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and it seems to me once they got there, they went into wardrobe, and they all just kind of grabbed something.
Okay.
And it's interesting. So I do think, to some degree, their personalities came out in the wardrobes that they chose. Because Carl's not a cowboy. I never thought Carl was a cowboy. Ever. Right. Ever. So Carl's not a cowboy. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
But Brian is the good humor man.
Brian is the good humor man is perfect.
Right.
It's perfect. And I'm willing to bet if somebody else was already grabbing that outfit, I could see Brian go, no, that's mine. And they'd be like, you know what? You're right. So, I mean, that was so perfectly cast. I mean, so when you look at Brian in the good humor outfit and you look at Bruce in the tuxedo and top hat,
yes,
Al kind of dressed up in like a German Bavarian thing.
Right, he's like the organ grinder, yeah.
Yeah, kind of works with the folky vibe. Dennis is like in a motorcycle outfit. I mean, it's not, I could see Dennis riding a motorcycle. Absolutely, he had a motorcycle. Really, the idea was that photo shoot was add some music to your day. And the idea was, you hear it in the ice cream cart, right?
Right.
So Brian's a good humor man with the ice cream cart. They hear it on your wedding day. Bruce is dressed up in a tuxedo, wedding day. So that to me is what they were striving for more than anything else. Because remember now, originally that's what the album was to be called.
David, this has been a great discussion talking about one of my favorite Beach Boys albums, certainly one of yours. And after listening to this, everybody's going to run out and get Sunflower, or better yet, the Feel Flows box set, and it'll become their favorite Beach Boys album too. But tell us, before you go, what is happening with Endless Summer Quarterly?
Well, yeah, it's a good idea to talk about ESQ. I'm actually currently working on the next two. I can easily do 4 editions right now. But what I'm working on is I've been wanting for a while to do, really since I did the Add Some Music to Your Day music video. And at the end, I put all the parents' names, because typically when you explore Beach Boys history, it's Murray and Audrey Wilson's name who always come up, because they gave the boys money and then they left, and then history has mistakenly told us many times they then used that money for instruments, and that's not the case. They used that money for food, and they went through it very quickly. And so then they had to go audition for Al Jardine's mother, Virginia, who then gave them $300 to rent the instruments. So I've been wanting to do matriarch editions because Audrey was very relevant and very important to that history. First of all, she's the mother. She's the DNA. Without Audrey Wilson, there is no Beach Boys, period.
Exactly. Right.
So that's kind of relevant.
She only birthed them,
Yeah, she only birthed them.
Right.
And so kind of get to this place where I thought, I really want to talk about Audrey Wilson. I really want to get into who she was and the type of person that she was, because I never met her. And I just wanted to explore that. And so I got to do 2 one-hour interviews with Carl's first wife and Billy Hinchy's sister, Annie. And I found out so much, not just about Audrey, about the relationship that Carl and Audrey had and all these things. So what happened was I had this idea that I was going to do the Audrey Wilson issue, followed by the Carl issue, because we're coming up on what would have been his 75th birthday.
Right.
And so I thought this is a good time to do this. And what's happening is everybody I'm talking to, I'm asking questions about both because of my wonderful discussion with Annie. So everybody I'm talking to, I'm not just talking about Audrey or Carl. I'm talking about both. So I think what's going to happen is these next two editions are going to kind of marry into one another. That they're not going to be just Audrey or just Carl. They're going to be both. And I for somebody who's listening who's not familiar with ESQ, Endless Summer Quarterly, our website is esquarterly.com. So ESQUARTERLY.com. And if you're listening to this and you do have the New Fuel Flows box set or any one of the iterations, 4LP, 2LP, 5 CD, or 2 CD, our web address is in the liner notes. You can find us that way.
David, thanks so much for appearing on the show, and we will speak again next month.
Thanks for having me on, as always. Thank you.